So thank you all so much for coming. First and foremost, my name is Phil Goldfeder. I'm the CEO of the American Fintech Council, the fastest growing fintech and innovative bank trade association based out of DC, looking to create standards, networking opportunities for the entire ecosystem, banks, innovative companies. Most importantly, I'm really proud to say that Spring Labs is one of our newest members. We're seeing a huge uptick, as it was mentioned at the last panel, a huge uptick in membership specifically related to companies engaging in AI for efficiency, for RegTech, and it's really, really exciting to be here today with Spring Labs. A huge round of applause for Spring Labs for putting this together. Come on. John, Eugene, Joel, the entire team has done an amazing job in only a few short months. Thank you so much for having the American Fintech Council as your partners. But even more exciting than being a host, I get to moderate this panel. And again, this is an exciting panel because you're talking literally you've got a little bit of everything here, a flavor of all. And I'm excited for you to get to hear a bit about what they have to say and what they're doing today. So with that, I'm going to have them each introduce themselves. And then I guess as a level set, as part of your introduction, quickly, because we don't have a ton of time. I think we only have about an hour and a half, so we got to move. If you could talk a little bit about how you're currently deploying AI or how you're thinking about AI. So Margaret, we're going to start with you.
Sure. So Margaret Mayer, CTO of Zions Bank. I'm ex-Capital One, ex-Discover as well. So spent my entire career in financial services. So how here at Zions we are deploying AI? We have been using machine learning for quite some time in various places, fraud, customer service. What we're really exploring right now is use cases for generative AI and how to get into that. And so we'll talk more, I think, a little bit about that.
Great.
Paul Zhang, co-founder and CIO at Avant. I co-founded Avant with Al and John. I've been a startup guy my whole career in fintech. Formerly went through Y Combinator with John in 2011. And Avant, as Al said, we've kind of started the business with the idea that machine learning can create better risk segmentation, can create better outcomes for our customers. And so that's been our bread and butter for the life of the company. And now we're exploring also how we might use generative AI. And just from a high level, we kind of have a two-pronged approach where we partner with someone like Spring Labs for certain use cases, where we feel like their product expertise is very, very helpful. And then internally, we use kind of our own data and our own data science know-how to kind of create or tackle use cases that are better addressed by using those things. So I'm really happy to talk about that during this panel.
Awesome. My name is Jordan Wright. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Atomic Financial. We're headquartered here in Utah. Atomic, we do several different things at Atomic, but I guess maybe the thing for this that I want to point out is that we've been using AI for about 3 years now, before the launch of ChatGPT, which it feels like before and after are an interesting thing. But since before ChatGPT, we've been using it to do web automation. And so we connect into different platforms, merchants, payroll systems to be able to do a couple things for consumers. First off, help them move the direct deposit. When they sign up for a new checking account, we can move the consumer's paycheck to go to the new bank that they have. Or we can move over all their payment activity to the new bank. We also do verification of income employment, some interesting subscription management stuff. But we're using AI in those areas for both web automation, but also to be able to understand what sits inside of a merchant account. As an example, I think some of you, we all used if we watched the Olympics, you might have signed up for a Peacock account for a short period of time. I think next time the Olympics come around, your bank is going to be able to prompt you afterwards and say, do you want to pause your subscription immediately following the Olympics and wait for the next major sporting event to come out? And we're going to be able to power that using AI. So hopefully we're going to be able to do that for all of you.
Amazing. Well, first, thank you. You're already taking us off topic and off script, so I'm really excited. No, I love it. Oftentimes, especially in financial services regulation, we're all drawn to the shiniest objects, particularly regulators. And you heard a bit about that at the last panel. Now, Paul, Avant sits on my board, and so you're my boss. And so we're going to start with you. Let me ask you, obviously you have been deploying AI in some form or other for a long time. You were kind of founded with that idea of how are we going to continue to innovate. that wasn't sexy at the time. You were doing it long before it was in the headlines, ChatGPT existed, or at least the way it is today. How did you think about it then? Was there fear involved? And then more importantly, how did you think it was going to enhance the consumer experience?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, we founded the company with the idea that machine learning and AI can help create a better customer experience, right? And I don't necessarily think that there was that much fear. As Al mentioned, Innova was his first company. I worked there. John worked there. So we had a lot of exposure to using machine learning, to using kind of like machine-based credit segmentation in addressing customer needs. So we firmly believe that was kind of like, something that was a positive for our customers, right? And part of our partnership with WebBank is kind of like working together with them to ensure that, everything that we're doing is transparent, everything we're doing is explainable, right? And that extends from our ML models that we are using for fraud or or for credit risk or for collections to kind of those generative AI use cases, right? So we've been working really closely with WebBank in order to kind of like make sure that everyone is fully aware and everyone's fully kind of like all the processes are documented, all of the data that we're using is kind of like governed correctly, and so we're addressing generative AI in the same spirit that we addressed ML, right? In the same spirit that we address kind of like using XGB models in order to do credit risk segmentation. So I think like with that kind of foundation, we feel really, really confident that generative AI is potentially transformative, but it's also just it's another tool in our toolbox to create a better customer experience, right? And it's kind of like it allows you to do a lot of things much faster, much easier, with more precision than you would have been able to do before. But at the same time, it is still a technology tool and it should still be governed and should still be understood as a technology tool.
Margaret, you're the bank. You just talked about partnering with the bank and understanding the nature of the relationship. Zion's bank, right? You guys are kind of well ahead of the bunch. And I say that community banks that don't embrace the concept of innovation today won't exist in 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. You are not one of those. Talk to me about how you think about how your partnerships and your engagement with AI, specifically for customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it starts with remembering that, we are in a regulated industry. So you start with thinking about, and let's talk about generative AI. First, what you need to start with is thinking about your code of conduct, your employee handbook, et cetera, and putting in something around the use of generative AI and that you as an employee are still responsible for the ownership of that content. So if you're generating something, an email, a marketing image, et cetera, right? And I think that part is critical because it's an assistance. It's not a replacement at this point. So that's number one. Number two, where you can cite sources, right? And some of the Gen AI tools can do that for you. So you know where it pulled it from so that if you are concerned, if you're looking at that again, gets that towards that explainability. That's a little bit more difficult with Gen AI than more traditional ML models. And then I think finally, where it's easier for banks to start innovating with Gen AI is in the employee productivity space. So again, that assistant to make me more productive or maybe take some time off. There's lots of cases out there in the public around call summarization where the Gen AI has been, listening, takes the transcript of the call and puts in more notes, more complete notes than the agent who, quite frankly, is rushed to get to the next call. So there's really a lot out there. And if you start, and then you can start thinking, well, where might I go publicly? Because let's talk about a chatbot, right? CX. So what I'm really excited about, but we are not doing yet. So let me clarify that. But what I'm really excited about is the fact that all of our user interfaces are predetermined. Right? Like, it's not how Margaret wants to interact with the bank. It's how some UX designer decided I should interact with the bank. I think what happens with CX is with generative AI, it actually allows us to remove that and think about well, if we could have a natural language interaction, how would Margaret engage with the bank? That's an unknown answer, but I think the power of generative AI there, I think it's untapped. Now, getting with that, though, it's got to get the right answer. So if I go back to the other interface, I know for sure that it's going, and I'll get a little techie here, it's making a specific API call. It's returning this balance. This balance is my posted balance. It's not like pulling some other number and putting the wrong label on it, which is the danger of generative AI. So I think it's in its infancy on that part, but I think the potential is huge.
Let me just piggyback off of what you said, and then Jordan, pivot back to you in terms of we're not doing it just for the sake of building businesses and finding ways to grow our businesses. We're doing it because consumers are expecting it more and more, right? They want instant answers. They want to work nights, weekends on their own schedule, regardless of whether you have humans in your bank or in your companies or not. Jordan, you brought up a really cool example. Now, for many of you, I spend my life on the road. I mean, this is conference season. And so I literally got a Paramount account after I got hooked on a show on my Delta flight and then forgot to cancel it, right? And as many of us do, it's part of this process. You're seeing a lot of companies step into that. But you're not doing it because it's good for you. You're doing it because that's what consumers need and want. And so how do you think about AI and sort of solving, really understanding what the consumer wants and making sure you're serving them?
Yeah, so one example of this that I saw recently, I was with the founder of a unicorn fintech. They were a unicorn in 2021. Maybe they aren't anymore. But I was with the founder of a unicorn fintech company, and he and I were chatting about the usage of how we're putting AI to use in both of our companies, and both of them were very customer centric, right? But his example was so interesting. So he has consumers asking them questions, and they can in real time generate a piece of content for that consumer. And they have one piece of AI write the content, and then they have another piece of AI check it for accuracy, and then another AI check it for accuracy. And then they deliver it to a consumer. And so it's the equivalent of Investopedia, frankly, but tailored exactly to the way you asked a question. And so I think that's the beauty of what can be done. And also, so interesting is he was spending about $300,000 a year on content creation a couple of years ago. He now spends $20,000 a year on content creation. And so I think that's one way that it's really, really interesting. I think another way that it's super interesting is when we think about the future. So right now, when you engage with ChatGPT or something like that, your experience is that it might give you a recommendation of something to do better in a finance category, in some category like that. But right now, it doesn't have the action layer built in, that it can't go the next step and say, okay, now connect your Verizon account and I'll cancel your Verizon account for you and I'll stand up that other account for you to help you save the money that we just talked about. And that's what we are focused on at Atomic, and that's one of the examples of the use cases I brought up. Your use case is a perfectly good use case. I think there are two worlds this ends up being, and in the conversations I'm having with people, they're like, well, I'm just going to give my one password over to ChatGPT, and it's going to connect on my behalf to everything and going to be able to do everything for me. That's one hopeful future. The other hopeful future is that I actually think this is a more likely case, is that I'm going to give that to a trusted, those connections to a trusted service. 1033 is doing interesting things for that already in financial services. But I think that extended beyond financial services in the next 5 years, we'll see it connecting to our merchants. We'll see it connecting to all these different places. And that can be done. And I think financial institutions have an opportunity to be the one creating that connective tissue via systems that can connect in there without having to capture username and password, but actually take action on behalf of a consumer and solve problems for them.
So, interestingly enough, and Paul, I'm not just trying to be nice because you sit on my board, but let me ask you this question. You guys, and Avant was arguably one of the founders of modern fintech, right? Avant sort of was there post-recession to sort of fill the gap where I think traditional financial institutions sort of dropped the ball. When you were there, when you were thinking about how you were building Avant, and we're going to pivot right back to you, Margaret, buy, partner, build, how did you think about how are you going to develop your company? Margaret, I'm going to go right to you after that, just to think about as a bank, right, who's been around and obviously is a bit different than a fintech company. How would you think about the same questions?
So I think that view has actually evolved over the years, right? When we started in 2012, the fintech ecosystem for vendors, for partners, it wasn't nearly as developed as it is now. And in many cases, you were looking at, if you were going to go buy something, it was a very legacy platform that might have gotten new coat of paint, but it was still something that was like 20, 30 years old, right? And so we kind of like were biased towards building everything ourselves in the very beginning, right? And so at Avant, we had our own servicing system that we built, our origination system we built, everything from customer interface to agent interface was all in-house. And now I think we have a little bit more nuanced view around kind of like, okay, we should focus on our core competencies, which is really about using our data, our analytics, our kind of data science expertise to create better segmentation or to better gauge risk, right, in this ecosystem, while we look to trusted vendors, trusted partners like Spring Labs to tackle things where where they could put their product focus, right, and their resources towards a specific problem that is very important to us, but maybe not a core competency, right? And so that's kind of like how we think about build versus buy in terms of like, we'll build something that's like that's foundational or like layers on top of our core competencies, and we'll buy the best in breed for things that are very important to us, but maybe fall outside the umbrella.
Margaret?
Yep. So, at Zions, we have largely a buy and integrate strategy. And so I look for our strategic partners. I look at their roadmaps and I try to understand, are they forward thinking? And if they aren't, what am I going to try and replace them or maybe nudge them along on that journey? But, at the same time, we're not entirely buy. We have a data science team. We have our own model builders. And so it's going to be a blend. And the beautiful thing, I think, about large language models and a lot of the things that have come out in the last half dozen years is you can take these core models that have already been trained, fine tune on top of it, and you keep your data in-house. I'm not sending my data out anywhere, because that is one of the big challenges is if I'm going to partner and it's a new space, well, I have to think through, where is my data going? Is it staying, isolated? Are they using it to train the model? How do I know at the end of the day that they aren't using it to train the model, even though they tell me they aren't? And so those, to me, are some of the significant threats to the buy and integrate strategy. Yet at the same time, because I've got a great data science team with my colleague, we're also able to look and say, well, maybe actually we can just do this ourselves and then integrate it in, because if I've got a modern tech stack, I can integrate pretty easily.
So credit where credit is due. I saw Jesse from Customers walked in the door. He sort of talks a lot about people, process, product, right? Like you can't just jump into your partnerships. You have to really understand. And then Carrie Ransom taught me something, what we call efficiency tech, right? And so Jordan, back to you, internal or external, right? Like, do you think about when you engage when we talk about customer experience is not just what touches the customer, right? Customer experience is also about your processes internally. How do you think about your efficiency tech, your reg tech, sort of the AI use as it relates to what you think is most responsible for the growth of the company?
Yeah, so I'm hopeful that we can become a $1 billion company with the 70 employees we have today, and that's a lot of growth for us. That's probably 3x growth for us to be able to be there. But because of the advances in AI, we see a lot of opportunities for efficiency gains. And so, if you're in the software world, or if your bank has software engineers, I highly recommend you go try a cool tool called Cursor. It's an IDE, but it allows people to develop software, and now people can start developing software via prompts instead of having to do some other things. And so, just to tease our developers, I started using Cursor, and it's been 15 years since I wrote any code. And I went home one night, and the next morning I had built an app that could connect into my Gmail, pull all my emails, then process those and send them over to ChatGPT. our enterprise instance, and it would evaluate them for the quality of email and say which one of these are the most important. It would then suggest a response back. It would then, and this is all done locally on my device, and then it would say, okay, and then I could just read through the responses, and I could filter by the quality of the email. And then I can just click send if it's pre-created a response that I liked and appreciated, right? Or I can edit it and make slight modifications. So like that's one interesting example for me. But another one that we did actually last week was, we've been looking at how we can get gains using ChatGPT. And two examples that I thought were impressive. One of our employees that just started, she was trying to get up to speed from a sales standpoint. And so I had a meeting with her. I went and traveled for a week. I came back the next week. The next week, I walk in and she does her pitch for me. It was like 10 times better. I was like, what have you been doing? And she's like, every night I go home and I tell ChatGPT to pretend like it's XYZ Bank. And then I train it on, and then I point it at Atomic Financials products. And I say, pretend you're a customer. And I want you to then she does a sales pitch with it. It asks questions to her. And then at the end of that sales pitch, she says, now critique me, right? Tell me what I did wrong. She said, I realized that I say the word like too often when I speak. And ChatGPT told her that, right? So that's one instance. The other instance was I did an interview with ChatGPT last week. I was driving and I just said, and I was interacting with the voice version of ChatGPT. And I said, I want you to interview me as if you're a reporter for the New York Times. And I want you to ask me questions in these 3 categories. And then I'd like you to think of what are 2 other questions that I haven't thought about. And then she then performed, it was a female voice, I shouldn't do that. It then performed an interview with me. And then I said, I want you to create 3 pieces of content. At first, the transcription of our conversation, then a long form piece of content for our website, and then a short form piece of content for my LinkedIn post. And all of that in an hour. And I did some minor editing to it, but the brain power of having to come up with, it's easier for me to talk about things. Obviously, I've probably been talking too long at this point, but it's easier for me to talk about things than to write and get into the granular detail. And so I was then able to modify that. And now we have 3 pieces of excellent content that are really generated from me. And so I think about that in terms of internal efficiencies. I would have engaged another human internally in our marketing group. I would have done all these things to be able to get that prepped and ready. And ChatGPT did it for me in about 35 minutes.
So we're just going to pause for a second to say, once again, thank you to Spring Labs for bringing us all together. I mean, this is really, really amazing, and I appreciate that. Margaret, how much does that scare you? Right? You are a regulated entity. There was once a point in banks, right? There's a problem. We're getting more scale, hire more people, right? Like to the extent that how many of these people do you need? And then all of a sudden, maybe there's a downturn and now you have a lot of people you don't need. But what he's talking about within a regulatory regime that right now is not the friendliest towards innovative community banks. How do you think about everything that Jordan just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think the example that Jordan gave is a fantastic example. So, and that's something that I actually think that a bank can use in meeting preparation. So, we have, a lot of our bankers are out there having to prepare for meetings and trying to understand if it's a current client, what products do they have with us, what's going on with them. They need to do research. They need to find out. That's an accelerant for them to bring all that data in. It's kind of like, an amped up search. But again, I go back to what I said earlier, which is, with the appropriate guardrails in an employee handbook or a code of conduct policy, depending on how, one's bank runs those things, you put those things in and it's still that banker is accountable to make sure, and you can ask ChatGPT for the sources, and so et cetera. So that part doesn't scare me as much as the, Jordan mentioned the 1033 legislation, right? And then putting generative AI or AI on top of that, I think that is potentially that is particularly challenging. And does the consumer know what they're consenting and opting into? That is actually the thing that scares me the most about what, if you play forward a couple of things on the legislation.
Paul, so what's the balance, right? How do you think about the right mix of human engagement and AI, and specifically as it relates to customer engagement?
Yeah, I think the title of this panel is actually a pretty good good segue, I guess. Like Copilots, I think, are a really good way where you have an AI tool, but then you have a human in the loop, right? where ultimately the AI is helping the human, right? And the human can help make sure that the AI stays in its guardrails, right? And I think like what we've done, one of the things that we're working on internally with our own resources is a fraud copilot, right? So we have a team of fraud analysts. Their whole job is to analyze escalated accounts, right? And they go through extensive training. But what we're asking is for humans to go look at all of these customer accounts, look at their like device reports, their phone reports, their email reports, and a lot of these are big blobs of unstructured data or JSON data or what have you, or like device fingerprints, right? And have them kind of like identify which ones are risky, which ones are not, right? And we put them through extensive training, but you can only train a human to a certain extent before it kind of like, it's like too much, right? But what we've done is create an AI copilot that can look at all this data. We train the copilot on, hey, this is what a suspicious account looks like. This is like the type of data that we're going to feed you. And here's a data dictionary. Like it understands JSON, it understands, device fingerprints, et cetera. And then it's helping our analysts be more efficient, right? We're expecting to kind of like use this so that we don't have to ramp up more humans to handle additional volume, right? That they're going to become more efficient. And then how it ties back to CX is really like nobody wants to be in a fraud process, right? Just like nobody wants to be in a verification process as a customer. Like your UI is just an entrance to one of your business processes. As long as it's getting more and more efficient, right? Like the customer is probably going to get more and more happy because I'm like the fraud process was seamless or the verifications process was like took 2 minutes, right? And so the more that we can help our human agents who are kind of like the last line become more efficient, the better it's going to make our customer experience. And the human agents are also going to help kind of like be in the loop and make sure that we're like their training is contributing to like kind of like that human AI stack, so to speak.
Amazing. It only took a half an hour to get to the topic we were meant to talk about from the beginning. Jordan, again, thinking about accessibility, utilizing AI to make financial services more accessible to broader demographics, potentially who are, again, similar to the way Avant and online lenders stepped in post-recession to create access to financial services and credit. How do you think about sort of AI's ability, again, combined with the right amount of human touch, to create more accessibility and a more seamless experience across the spectrum of consumer?
Yeah, I get really nervous, frankly, about and I'm a huge AI fan, but I get really nervous about this piece of using AI in lending and things like that makes me very, very nervous. Because, what if it identifies something that, there are just so many things it could key in on that are not touched on by regulation today. And because regulation is moving so slowly, my biggest concern on it, and maybe I'll go like the opposite of I'm excited about it. My biggest concern on it is, it moves so fast. We're talking about something that really happened 2 years ago, right? And here we are sitting here, and somebody was asking, do you use it every month? Do you use it every week? Do you use it every day? And I was keeping my hand up because I thought he was going to say every hour, So, it's something that's become that much a part of our lives. And so I worry about that. I just read a book called Nexus by the guy that wrote Sapiens. It's an excellent book on AI and the future of AI. And there are a lot of things that worry me tremendously about it. One gain that I see, there's B2B and there's B2C, right? B2B, a huge B2B gain that we see from a customer experience standpoint that allows us to go forward much more quickly is if a customer needs iteration, if our engineers are using tools like Cursor that make them 2 or 3 times more effective, right? Then suddenly we can turn things around with lightning speed and be able to provide them a much better experience, or to Margaret's point earlier, potentially change the experience in real time for the real-time customer experience using that AI. I think that's very exciting about the future, but I am also very worried about what it might key into.
So I love the fact that coming from the person who talked about how he integrates AI into literally how he does everything in his life is just as fearful of potentially where we're going and this pace at which we're going. I spent an entire career in politics and in government before I say a recovering politician, aspiring fintech nerd, and trying to better understand sort of what the future holds. The challenge we all have, and everybody in this room has, is that we're all defined by what is in tomorrow's front page of Pick Your Paper, right? Or in what blog you're reading, or what Jason or Alex writes on Sundays in their blog posts. We're all then beholden to, on Monday morning, to think about how we're going to respond and how are we going to put out the good message and change that tone. It's what we call reactionary regulating, reactionary legislating. So how much time before we're actually ready? Now, firstly, obviously, and maybe I'll start with you, Margaret. How much time do you talk about engaging with your regulators to talk very specifically about what you're doing, how you're doing it? And at what point does this become sort of just what you do or how banks operate? And I want to touch on that in different variations for each of you.
Yeah, part of our technology strategy has AI in it. So when I update my regulatory partners on that, we talk about where we are with it and what we're doing. So I would say on a fairly regular basis. And of course, we have a robust model risk management department that is also engaged, in those areas. I'm not part of those, but, I think that, in the bank, the regulators are quite interested in where we're using it and how we're using it. And, and we provide that transparency back, even starting, with our supply chain and intake processes. So,
again, when are we going to get there, Paul? Like, what's when are we going to feel comfort? When is the consumer going to feel comfort, right? How much longer do we have? When are we going to see this mainstream?
So I think I think like what we found in terms of like using AI, the more specific use case, specific training, specific data that you're giving it, the more, call it trustworthy it is. And I think maybe like that's going to be kind of like, like as we get further along in the implementation of AI across the industry, you see it everywhere. I think it becomes more ubiquitous. Like it's already on your phones, right? Like folks are using AI without even realizing it. And I think for financial institutions, I think there's a lot of excitement and push towards using it. And a lot of folks think about it from a very general basis. But I think the models themselves, the foundational models, yes, they're very generalist, right? But I think if you constrain your use cases and you constrain the data it has access to, you give it a lot better guardrails, and it makes you as the implementer, as the company implementing it, feel a lot more comfortable putting it out in production with your team, with your internal analysts, and with your external customers. So I think that's going to be a journey, and frankly, that's going to be something that we're iterating through, right? So as a startup tech guy, I won't give a timeline because there's no timelines. You just keep iterating, right?
Okay, Jordan, then we're gonna start with you for kind of the final question in terms of what does a year from now look like? What does 5 years from now look like? What does farther than that look like? Now, we spend a lot of time at the American Fintech Council thinking through kind of how do we laying the foundation today for what is gonna come. What actually, in your mind, does that look like?
I have no clue because it's moving so fast. I would be insane to try, but I will make a minor attempt. In the world of mobile native, which, Chime and a bunch of these don't even have a website, or a bunch of these fintechs don't even have a website for consumers to engage in, I would encourage people in this audience to think of what does AI native look like? And I think the first AI native banks, I know one group is looking to buy a bank right now, a bank charter, so they can start fully from the ground up AI native. And I think that looks like probably 2 years out, frankly, from what I've seen of what it takes to buy a bank, of getting started 2 years from now, if regulators approve something like that. But I wonder about the advantages that an AI native company will have. And so I think that for all of us, somebody talked about in the last panel, do I look at attrition as ways to bring in more and more? I lose an employee. Do I replace that with AI? That's what we do at Atomic. And so I really think that we should be considering that internally for ourselves. How do we build and scale with what we have today? Another thing that I will mention is that in an AI native world, it's going to be so hard to stay up to speed with it unless you're living and breathing it every single day. I mean, as the CEO of my company, we have a 40-person engineering team, and 5 of those are machine learning AI engineers. I moved them to report directly to me about a year and a half ago, and they all report directly to me. I meet with them in the first week of every month. They give me an update on everything happening in AI, and then I think those are the sorts of things we need to do as leaders. We can't say I'm not technical anymore. We can't say like I can't get involved in that anymore. We need to say that needs to move right into me as the major decision maker in our company, because if I don't understand it, we are going to be held back as a company in how we make decisions, and we will be left behind.
Good answer. Paul, 1 year, 5 years, 20 years, where will you be?
Maybe I'll be in space. I don't know. So I think like the 1 year kind of like 1 or 2 years, I would say, if you like something I read, I think it was one of the YC partners wrote, is like when you see all these AI use cases and they barely work, that's actually really exciting because the models are just getting exponentially better, right? And so the use cases that barely work today are going to be the ones that are like working really, really well in 2 years, right? So I think like and at the same time, there's so much energy in the space and so much like technical know-how devoted to it that we're going to constantly get better at building kind of support products around AI and kind of like, you know, dealing with hallucinations, dealing with kind of like safety barriers, et cetera, right? So I think like there's going to be a lot of the nascent kind of use cases that you see today are going to be fully operationalized in 2 years. And I think in 10 years, you're looking at potentially, I truly believe you're looking at potentially like a transformative societal kind of like technology, right? And so, you know, I'm a sci-fi nerd. So, you know, the phrase that comes to mind might be a post-scarcity society. Maybe too early in 10 years, but, you know, we'll see.
Okay, Margaret, for you, I think the question takes a little bit of a different bent, right? We have, as part of our membership, although Zions is not a member yet, we have almost 30 innovative banks offering embedded finance in some way, shape, or form. What do banks look like? And I make the point all the time that if they don't innovate, they'll die.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, so I think 1 year from now, what you're going to hear is a bunch of operational productivity gains, incremental use cases, making an existing process better, taking manual toil out. And that's important, by the way. I think, though, you start to hit that 5-year mark, and as the gains continue to happen on the science of AI and generative AI, you start to have to reimagine. And what I would challenge all the people in the room is pay attention to that inflection point when you're going from an incremental transformation of a productivity gain to actually, wait a minute, we're just going to do this entirely differently, right? And what does that look like? And you have to reimagine that. And so whether that's 5 years or 10 years is a little unclear to me. It depends a little bit on how fast, you know, we can feel confident in generative AI and in what use cases, but it will happen. And so it's paying attention to those moments, and then doing your own, maybe, you know, having a little innovation center on your own where you're experimenting in a sandbox so that you can see how it is, so that you're ready as you start to see those inflection points, or maybe you're the place that finds that inflection point.
And again, a great opportunity to plug at 12:45. Travis Hill, who's the vice chairman of the FDIC, is going to be talking about kind of how we should be thinking about the regulatory structures as we start to do these implementations. Again, tremendous thank you to Spring Labs, to all of our partners, to our great panel. Thank you so much for being here.